36 north longitudes and is 80 kilometers from the southeastern city of Suleimania. It is 16 kilometers away from Iran. The population of Halabja, including surrounding villages, according to the statistics of 1977, was about 19,000 people. After its expulsion of Ba'ath's regime and reconstruction of Halabja in 1990s, according to another statistic, the population increased to about 120,000 people. The religion of the vast majority of people of Halabja is Islam, and it is the birthplace of many Islamic scholars. The native language of people of Halabja is Kurdish. Halabja before the attack. Since 1889, Halabja has been the site of struggle and confrontation between the Jaf tribes and their opponents. Famous leaders of the Jaf tribes include Adila Khanum, who ruled from 1909 to 1924 and played a crucial role in gathering support from the people of Halabja for the rebellion of Sheikh Mahmoud against the British. During the years 1930s to 1980s, several political movements and parties appeared and established themselves in Halabja. Moreover, since those years up till now, people of Halabja have performed many political and military activities against the operations of the successive governments of Iraq, which was why it was always targeted by those regimes. Halabja was bombarded many times by Iraqi armed forces during 1960s to 1980s, such as in 1963, General Zaim Sadiq burned major sections of the town of Halabja. Resistance continued in the following years, but flared up again in 1974. In that year, Halabja was a major headquarters from which the Peshmerga launched their revolution, and the regime reacted with another bombardment that began on 26 April 1974. 52 civilians were killed in that bombardment and many more were left with chronic disabilities. On 12 May 1987, the Ba'athist regime attacked demonstrations held by the people of Halabja with war helicopters and tanks. 12 people were killed during the bombardment, and several wounded were later buried alive by Ba'athist security force. These bodies were uncovered in 1991. Then the regime began to wait for another pretext to attack the town. Demonstrations against the regime had been organized from 1980 to 1988, and the regime always responded with arms. The catastrophe of the Halabja chemical bombardment time is night of 13th over 14th March 1988. The people of Halabja intensely hear sounds of bombs and rockets due to Iraq-Iran war. They already got acquainted with the sounds of warplanes and bombardments, but the sounds and echoes of this time is different. It's raining like firing. The horizon of mountains is sparkling. On March 16th March of 1988, as the sun rises, people flood into the streets, bazaar and alleys, as usual. Halabja Square is crowded around. The downtown of Halabja is flooding with mass murmuring. Some of those people who left the city in the evening, and most of them stayed on the mountains, returned to the city in the next day afternoon. The time is a beautiful spring with a spotless sky. The season is moderate. A dark green plain shows itself. Time is 11:45 in the morning. It is time for midday praying. Most of the families are setting table for lunch. Suddenly, the sound of planes excites the city, along with stunning booms of bombed explosions. Everything is confused. The booms and sounds of the explosions are so high that shake and bring the city to earthquake. Smokes and screams and supplications of the children, women, and elders excite the sky. Flocks of planes come in every 10 seconds and unmercifully pour their anger over the city. A filthy dark cloud dominates the sky of the city. Doors, windows, and shutters of the shops and houses smash down. They cannot resist to the explosions. There are bombardments in every corner. People of the city are so confused that they are scattered and left their homes and places. They said to run away outside the city. Those who have basements sleep into them, hoping for escape at any time. The bombardment has heavily struck the city since it was started up to 2 p.m. Just like the ants creeping, the escapees are moving towards outside of the city in all directions. It is very hard for everyone to survive in such circumstances. The survivors got either blind or bent or faint and unconscious for several days. Livestock and animals are not far from the catastrophe. The streets that are full of chemical gases also embrace them. That mist over Halabja was composed of sarin, taboon, mustard gas, and nerve agents such as VX. If you overlook the city from distance, a dark red, orange, and white colored smoke shadows over it. The stinky smell of fruits and sewage spread around the city. In this massacre, more than 5,000 innocent civilians lost their lives within few minutes, and more than 10,000 people were hideously injured and suffer to this day. Finally, after the liberation of Iraq, the key people who committed this crime, Saddam Hussein al-Majid, former president of Iraq, and Ali Hassan al-Majid, the cousin of Saddam and former Minister of Defense, after several trials, were sentenced to death for their crimes. Who were the suppliers of chemicals? Precursor chemicals and manufacturing equipment came from a variety of sources. The government of Iraq had a great deal of indigenous capacity of manufacturing the weapons. Many of the shells found at Halabja have Soviet markings. With regard to Western companies, there's data pointing to 85 German, 19 French, 18 British, and 18 US suppliers. On the 28th of February 2013, the United Kingdom House of Commons, in a parliamentary debate, passed a motion recognizing as genocide the 16th March 1988 poison gas attack by Iraqi forces on the Kurdish town of Halabja. The parliament resolved that this house formally recognizes the genocide against the people of Iraqi Kurdistan, encourages governments, the EU and UN to do likewise, believes that this will enable Kurdish people, many in the UK, to achieve justice for their considerable loss, and further believes that it would enable the UK, the home of democracy and freedom, to send out a message of support for international conventions and human rights, which is made even more pressing by the slaughter in Syria and the possible use of chemical arsenals. After the revolution of Kurdish people in 1991, against Ba'ath regime. Halabja was relocated and reconstructed, and it is currently under the control of Kurdistan regional government. Thank you for listening again.
Thank you very much to my colleague Shakhawan for this brief introduction about Halabja. And now, ladies and gentlemen, may I ask you please to join me in 2 minutes silence, to stand up please, as a tribute to the souls of the martyrs of Halabja. Thank you. Please be seated. Thank you very much. And now I'd like to ask our friend Mr. David Hall, the Registrar of the University of Leicester, to give his speech, please.
Colleagues, I first thank Shakhawan and Gaz, and indeed the students of the Kurdish Society for their kind invitation to invite me to say a few personal words at this memorial event. Well, actually, I remember Halabja and Saddam Hussein's murderous occupation of the Kurdish region. I remember it, of course, from the safety and security of Britain, where I was at the time the president of the Students' Union of the University of Reading. And as the details of the atrocities of the Anfal filtered through the British media, there was a call for people to donate clothing so that it could be sent to the Kurdish people who at the time were sheltering, so we were told, in the Zagros Mountains. And as the president of a Students' Union, I was able, had the resources, to organise a collection around Reading, and we sent a few sacks of clothes to Oxfam in the hope that they would find their way into the hands of a people who at the time seemed very different and very distant from where we were. And I recall being invited into a local radio station and was interviewed and asked why we were collecting clothes. I could only explain that it was the least we could do, and would have mumbled something about trying to stand in solidarity with the Kurdish people, who we were now learning how much they were suffering under Saddam Hussein. 25 years later, I've been extremely fortunate to be able to have visited Kurdistan now on a number of occasions, and it's no longer a distant place of mystery, but somewhere I feel I've become to know a lot better, and it is more a place of friends than of strangers. And it is, of course, itself no longer a place of hate and fear and suffering, but of redemption and freedom and hope. I'm proud to say that my university, in a very small way, has been able to play some part in helping to realise that hope. I've also been fortunate to have visited the recently opened Anfal monument on the road out from Erbil to Soleimani. It's a spectacular memorial, not only to the victims of the Anfal, but also to the Peshmerga, who faced death and gave their lives in the defence of the Kurdish people. And I think it is fitting that Leicester is able to host this event because this university, as some of you will know, was born out of the violence and slaughter of the First World War. And it is in fact itself a living memorial to the men and women of Leicestershire and Rutland who died in the service of their country. Our Latin motto, Ut vitam habeant, means that they may have life. That we will remember those who came before us in the same way that I'm sure that the Kurdish people will forever continue to want to remember those who died in the genocide. And why do we remember? What is the purpose of a memorial? I do not believe that we should remember simply out of respect or in order to seek justice, nor to be aspired to avenge, but that remembering the dead provides the living with an opportunity to reflect, for us to reflect on our own lives, to be thankful that we remain free from the terrible fear and suffering which imbues these monuments, but more importantly, that they inspire us to have the courage to seek to leave the world in a better place than we have found it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. And now our second speaker, Dr. Viv from Museum Studies. Can you please?
Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's an enormous pleasure for me to be here together with some friends and some colleagues. I want to just give you a personal view. I've been to Kurdistan now on 2 occasions. I first went with Kazan, and I met his brother there, and I came to really love the country, to love the people, to love your cuisine, to love your landscape. I came to have this very deep love of your nation. But it was an interesting journey for me because in 2003 I was standing on the streets of Leicester and I was protesting with my other colleagues against the war, because I didn't believe at the time that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. And so my trips to Kurdistan have really completely changed my views. Now I'm a firm believer that the war was right for your people, and I had no knowledge of this before. So over the years since visiting Kurdistan, I've completely transformed my ideas, and I wanted to start by saying that. I should probably start to show you some slides now. So the second time I went to Kurdistan, I wanted to go to a region called Suleymaniye, which is where Kazan's family live, and I was able to go there for 2 weeks. And I was able to go to the Halabja monument and to go to the gravesites there, which was a terribly moving experience for me as a museum professional. I also went to look for a number of days at the Red Museum at Amna-Surkar, and I spent some time in Amna-Surkar talking to the director of the museum, who's a new director, who was actually an artist. And I became, again, I have a new friendship with somebody in a Kurdish museum. I want to show you some photographs of the Amna-Surkar Museum. This is the Halabja Monument Museum, and this is Amna-Surkar, the Red Museum. So you see the site of the museum here. The outside of the building bears the scars of the war. The building itself is damaged. It's an incredibly moving experience to go to any of these sites in Kurdistan for somebody who hasn't suffered in the way that many people in the hall here today have suffered. For an outsider to go there, we still feel a terrible sense of emotion and a terrible sense of loss. And so we cry over the buildings and over the monuments that we see there. One of the sites is a hallway here that you see. This is Amna Surakar. It's a hallway that was designed by Hero, the First Lady of Kurdistan, and she designed the walls of the hallway to be pieces of broken mirror. And each piece of broken mirror represents one of the lives that have been lost in the Kurdistan, in this prison when Saddam Hussein had imprisoned many thousands of people there and tortured and murdered them. So we look at ourselves reflected in these pieces of mirror, and our image is fragmented and broken up, but it's also joined together again. And it's an abstract view of looking at loss and suffering, but it's one that really works for me on an emotional level. Another part of the museum, they have many sculptures of people who were real historical people who were imprisoned in the museum. So this woman, her child was born in the museum. She was unable to feed her child with her breast milk, and so her breasts were incredibly painful. And she lived there for a number of years. And the women who were in prison, not in this museum, but in other museums, were subjected to rapes and to the most unbearable tortures that we can imagine. And the men were tortured in the most terrible ways that you see represented in terms of the sculptures here. This man has been strung up, and he's been subjected to electric shocks. And in the next slide, you'll see another torture, being chained to the hallway here. And in the next slide, you'll see unbearable whippings. Some of these other cells are empty, and you just see the blankets and some water, and you imagine that dogs would live in these conditions. You can't imagine that any human beings were ever subjected to such suffering. So the new director of the museum is doing all sorts of things to make this experience, which is a very painful experience for Kurdish people and for international visitors, to make that experience bearable in a way. So he's looking at not just the historical suffering, but how we might work together for the future of your country and the future of the world, to make a better world. So he's looking at things like ecology. So the bottles that you saw there, he's very concerned that the younger people don't really know about the way that you have had to fight for your freedom in your country. And he's concerned that they throw their bottles down the mountains and perhaps drink and in the ways that we are not really allowed to drink according to certain religions. So he had the plastic bottles there, and he wanted to build gardens in the bottles to show people that we really should care for our environment, and we should respect our environment and each other. Now